Hello everyone, and welcome back to Snowbound Screams. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America's mountain wilderness places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Specifically, we journey into the heart of the Rocky Mountains, that formidable spine stretching from Canada to New Mexico, where park rangers serve as the thin line between civilization and the vast unknown. Across these peaks, valleys, and remote outposts are accounts drawn from witness reports, Park Service files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. These are the stories of those who patrol our protected lands, the men and women who sometimes encounter phenomena that defy explanation in the course of their duties. The Rocky Mountains span over 3,000 miles, encompassing numerous national parks, forests, and wilderness areas. Rangers working in these territories face natural dangers daily. Extreme weather, treacherous terrain, and wildlife encounters are part of the job. But occasionally, they face something else entirely, something that doesn't appear in any training manual or field guide. In tonight's extended episode, we'll examine 8 cases spanning 5 decades, all documented by Park Service employees in the Rocky Mountain region. These accounts come from official incident reports, audio recordings, and first-hand testimony. They represent a small fraction of the unusual encounters that occur each year in America's wilderness areas, from unexplained lights in the sky to mysterious voices on the radio. From impossible footprints in the snow to encounters with beings that don't match any known species, these are the stories that keep rangers looking over their shoulders long after their shifts end. What follows is not speculation or folklore. These are documented events with official records, multiple witnesses, and lasting physical evidence in some cases. They represent the unexplained phenomena that occur in the wilderness when no one is watching except, sometimes, those tasked with protecting it. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 1978 when Ranger Daniel Mitchell first noticed something unusual in the backcountry of Rocky Mountain National Park. At 42, Daniel had spent 15 years with the National Park Service, the last 7 patrolling the remote western section of the park. He knew these mountains better than most people know their own neighborhoods, every trail, every ridge, every seasonal change. That autumn had been particularly harsh, with early snowstorms driving most visitors from the higher elevations. Daniel found himself alone for days at a time in the remote patrol cabin near Timber Creek, a small wooden structure built in the 1930s that served as a base for backcountry operations. The cabin sat in a small valley surrounded by dense lodgepole pine forests and towering granite peaks that rose dramatically against the Colorado sky. The first incident occurred on October 23rd, during what should have been a routine patrol of the trail system around Timber Lake. Daniel had set out that morning under a steel gray sky, the air crisp with the promise of winter. He followed the familiar path through the forest, his boots crunching on the early season snow that dusted the ground in patches. The forest was unnaturally quiet that day. Even the usual chorus of birds and squirrels seemed absent. As he rounded a bend about 3 miles from the cabin, Daniel noticed something that made him stop. There, in the middle of the trail, was a set of footprints that didn't match any hiking boot or shoe he'd ever seen. They were elongated, with what appeared to be only 4 toes and measured approximately 14 inches in length. What disturbed him most was their depth. Whatever had made these impressions was heavy, far heavier than any human could be while still maintaining a human-sized foot. Daniel photographed the prints with his service camera and made detailed measurements in his field notebook. He continued his patrol, but the feeling of being watched never left him. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves in the wind, seemed amplified in the silence of the forest. When he returned to the cabin that evening, he double-checked the deadbolts on the door, something he hadn't done in years. 2 days later, while conducting a wildlife survey near the Kawuniche Valley, Daniel heard something that defied explanation. He had stopped to observe a herd of elk grazing in a meadow when he heard what sounded like rocks being struck together in a rhythmic pattern. The sound echoed through the valley, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. It wasn't the random clatter of rockfall, there was an intelligence to it, a deliberate cadence that suggested communication. Daniel radioed dispatch to report the unusual sounds, but the response came back with static and interference, unusual for that area of the park. He tried twice more with similar results before giving up and continuing his work. The rhythmic stone clacking continued for nearly an hour before gradually fading into the distance. The following week brought the most disturbing encounter. Daniel was returning to his cabin after dark when he noticed a series of large stones arranged in a pattern near the trail, roughly circular, with a larger stone in the center. He hadn't noticed these earlier in the day, and he knew he hadn't passed this way recently. The stones were too large to have been moved by a single person, and there were no vehicle tracks or signs of human activity nearby. What chilled him most was finding a similar arrangement of stones approximately 50 yards from his cabin when he returned. These stones were arranged in a line pointing directly toward the cabin door. Daniel had worked in wilderness areas for most of his adult life and had never encountered anything like this. Neither human nor animal behavior could explain what he was seeing. The final incident occurred on November 2nd during a snowstorm that swept through the park. Daniel had been out checking on a remote weather station when the storm intensified, forcing him to return to the cabin early. As he approached the cabin, he saw a large, dark shape moving through the trees near the structure. The figure was taller than any human, at least 8 feet by his estimation, and covered in dark hair or fur. It moved with an unnatural silence despite its size, disappearing into the forest before Daniel could get a clear look or reach for his binoculars. Daniel filed an official report with park headquarters after this incident, including photographs of the footprints and stone arrangements. His supervisor, Ranger Thomas Wexler, conducted a follow-up investigation but found no additional evidence. The case was officially logged as unexplained wildlife activity and filed away. Daniel Mitchell continued working for the National Park Service for another 10 years, though he never requested another assignment in the backcountry of Rocky Mountain National Park. In an interview before his retirement in 1988, he said, "I've seen grizzly bears up close, survived avalanches, and dealt with every kind of emergency you can imagine in the wilderness. But whatever was out there that fall that was different. The stone arrangements and unusual footprints have never been satisfactorily explained. Similar reports have surfaced over the years from other rangers working in remote areas of the Rockies, but official acknowledgement remains elusive. The backcountry of Rocky Mountain National Park continues to draw visitors, unaware that something might be watching from the dense forests beyond the trails." It was just after midnight on August 14, 1992, when park communications specialist Rebecca Chen first noticed the anomaly. At 28, Rebecca had been working for the National Park Service for 3 years, stationed at the Communications Center in Rocky Mountain National Park headquarters. Her job involved monitoring radio traffic from rangers in the field, coordinating emergency responses, and maintaining the park's communication systems. That night had been particularly quiet, with only 2 rangers on patrol in the eastern section of the park due to budget cuts that had reduced nighttime staffing. The summer season had been busy, but this particular Tuesday night saw fewer visitors than usual, with most campgrounds reporting only 60–70% occupancy. At approximately 12:17 a.m., Rebecca picked up an unusual transmission on a frequency reserved for Park Service operations. The signal was weak but clear, a series of rhythmic clicks and tones that didn't match any known communication protocol. She checked her logs to confirm no authorized operations were using that frequency, then attempted to identify the source through direction-finding equipment. What she discovered was troubling. The transmission appeared to be originating from the area around Crystal Lake, a remote location approximately 12 miles from the nearest road. No rangers were currently assigned to that area, and no backcountry permits had been issued for that region in the past week. The signal continued for approximately 17 minutes before ceasing abruptly. Rebecca documented the incident in the communications log and notified her supervisor, Communications Director Raymond Walsh. Raymond instructed her to continue monitoring the frequency, but not to attempt contact unless the signal returned. He also requested that she file a formal incident report, which she did the following morning. The mysterious transmission returned 3 nights later, this time lasting nearly 30 minutes. Rebecca again attempted to pinpoint the location, which appeared to be the same area around Crystal Lake. What disturbed her most was the complexity of the signal. It seemed to contain patterns and repetitions that suggested intelligent origin rather than random noise or equipment malfunction. On the third occurrence, August 20th, Rebecca decided to record the transmission using Park Service equipment. The recording captured approximately 25 minutes of the unusual signal, which consisted of varying sequences of clicks, tones, and what sounded like faint vocalizations beneath the primary sounds. When analyzed later by audio specialists, the recording revealed mathematical patterns in the signal structure, though no meaning could be deciphered. The most unsettling aspect of these transmissions was what happened when Rebecca attempted to establish contact. On 2 occasions, she transmitted standard identification signals on the frequency, which resulted in immediate cessation of the mysterious broadcast. The silence that followed felt deliberate, as if whatever was transmitting had heard her and chosen to stop. On August 24th, Park Rangers Michael Donovan and Sarah Jenkins were dispatched to investigate the Crystal Lake area. They found no signs of recent human activity, no footprints, no campfire remains, no equipment. What they did discover was unusual: a series of metal stakes driven into the ground in a geometric pattern near the lake's edge. The stakes appeared to be of non-standard manufacture, with no markings or identification. Each was topped with a small crystalline structure that seemed to serve no apparent purpose. The Rangers photographed the arrangement and collected one of the stakes for analysis. When tested, the metal was found to be an alloy of unknown composition, containing elements not typically found together in manufactured materials. The crystalline structures proved even more mysterious. They appeared to be quartz-like substances with unusual electrical properties. That night, Rebecca received another transmission, this time noticeably different from previous ones. The signal was stronger and contained what sounded like distorted speech, though no recognizable words could be identified. The transmission continued for approximately 40 minutes before ending abruptly. When Rebecca checked her equipment afterward, she found that the direction-finding system had been recalibrated to point away from Crystal Lake, toward the more remote areas of the park's Mummy Range. The following day, Rangers Donovan and Jenkins returned to Crystal Lake to find that the remaining stakes had been removed, with no trace left behind except for small holes in the ground where they had been placed. The area showed no signs of vehicle traffic or human passage. Despite the difficulty of accessing the location without specialized equipment, Rebecca Chen continued working at the communications center for another 2 years, though she never again encountered transmissions like those from August 1992. In a statement given to Park Service investigators in 1993, she said, "I've worked with radio communications for most of my career, and I know equipment malfunctions, atmospheric phenomena, and unauthorized transmissions." The Crystal Lake transmissions were officially logged as unidentified radio signals of unknown origin, and were never fully explained. The metal stake collected by rangers was reportedly sent to a government facility for analysis, but the results were never released to Park Service personnel. Similar mysterious transmissions have been reported by other Park Service employees over the years, though none as well documented as the Crystal Lake incident of 1992. The Communications Center at Rocky Mountain National Park continues to monitor all frequencies. But whatever transmitted those signals in the summer of 1992 has never returned, at least not on frequencies we can detect. It was early June of 2005 when Ranger Thomas Miller began his final patrol in the Never Summer Mountains of Rocky Mountain National Park. At 34, Thomas had been with the National Park Service for 8 years, specializing in high-altitude rescue operations and backcountry surveillance. He was known for his physical endurance and familiarity with the most remote sections of the park. Thomas set out on June 3rd for what was scheduled to be a 5-day patrol of the Never Summer Wilderness area. His route would take him through some of the most isolated terrain in the park, where elevations exceed 12,000 feet and weather conditions can change rapidly. He was equipped with standard ranger gear, including emergency supplies, GPS equipment, and a satellite phone for areas without radio coverage. The first 2 days of his patrol proceeded as expected, with Thomas checking in at scheduled times via satellite phone. On the evening of June 5th, he made his last scheduled contact, reporting from a campsite near Parika Lake. He mentioned unusual cloud formations, but otherwise indicated that everything was proceeding normally. When Thomas failed to check in on the morning of June 6th, dispatch initially attributed it to possible equipment malfunction or poor weather conditions. However, when he missed his second scheduled contact that evening, a search operation was initiated. By morning, a full-scale search effort was underway, involving Park Service personnel, volunteer search and rescue teams, and aircraft from the Colorado Army National Guard. The search team located Thomas's campsite near Parika Lake on June 7th. The site appeared undisturbed, with his tent still standing and equipment properly stored. His satellite phone was found inside the tent, fully functional. His pack, water filtration system, and most of his emergency supplies were also present. What was missing were Thomas's sidearm, his Park Service radio, and the notebook he used for recording observations and incidents. Search teams followed what appeared to be tracks leading away from the campsite toward the ridge above Parika Lake. The tracks matched Thomas's issued boots and suggested he had left camp in a hurry, without taking time to gather essential equipment. The tracks led approximately half a mile up the slope before disappearing at a rocky outcropping. A more extensive search of the area revealed additional disturbing evidence. Approximately 3/4 of a mile from the campsite, searchers discovered a circular area of flattened vegetation approximately 20 feet in diameter. Within this circle, several small stones had been arranged in patterns that didn't appear to be natural formations. Most unusual were 3 sets of footprints within the circle, one matching Thomas's boots, and 2 others that were non-human in appearance, showing what appeared to be 4-toed impressions with a stride length estimated at over 6 feet. The search expanded over the following days, eventually covering more than 50 square miles of rugged terrain. Aircraft equipped with thermal imaging technology conducted systematic sweeps of the area, while ground teams explored likely locations where Thomas might have sought shelter or where an accident might have occurred. Despite these efforts, no trace of Thomas Miller was found beyond the initial evidence at his campsite. The investigation into Thomas's disappearance revealed several unusual details. According to weather records, Conditions in the area had been relatively mild on the night of June 5th to 6th, with no storms or extreme temperature drops that might explain an emergency departure from camp. Wildlife activity in the area appeared normal, with no evidence of aggressive animal behavior. Perhaps most troubling were reports from other visitors to the area. Two backpackers who had been camping approximately 3 miles from Thomas's location reported seeing unusual lights in the sky on the night of his disappearance. They described silent, pulsating lights that moved in patterns inconsistent with aircraft or natural phenomena. Another group reported hearing what sounded like whispering voices on the wind, though they attributed this to atmospheric conditions. The official search for Thomas Miller was officially suspended on June 20th, though periodic checks of the area continued for several months. The case was classified as unexplained disappearance and remains open with the National Park Service and the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. Thomas Miller was never seen again. His Park Service locker contained only personal items and clothing. His apartment in Estes Park showed no signs of disturbance or preparation for an extended absence. Bank accounts and credit cards showed no activity after June 5th, 2005. Friends and colleagues described him as dedicated to his work and emotionally stable, with no reason to abandon his position or disappear voluntarily. In the years following Thomas's disappearance, other rangers working in the Never Summer Mountains have reported unusual phenomena: strange lights, unexplained sounds, and the feeling of being watched in remote areas. Most notable was a 2011 incident in which a ranger conducting a wildlife survey discovered geometric patterns of stones similar to those found near Thomas's campsite. The disappearance of Thomas Miller remains one of the most puzzling mysteries in the history of Rocky Mountain National Park. No definitive explanation has ever been offered for his vanishing, though theories range from an encounter with an unknown creature to abduction by non-human entities. What is certain is that something happened to Thomas Miller in the wilderness of the Never Summer Mountains on that June night in 2005. Something that left behind only a deserted campsite, mysterious footprints, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. It was mid-September of 2016 when seasonal ranger Alex Thompson first encountered what would become known as the Phantom Hiker of Rocky Mountain National Park. At 24, Alex was working his first season with the National Park Service, assigned to patrol the popular Bear Lake corridor. He was an experienced hiker and outdoorsman, familiar with the area from numerous personal trips before joining the Park Service. The first encounter occurred on September 12th, while Alex was conducting a late afternoon patrol of the trail to Emerald Lake. The weather was turning, with dark clouds gathering over the Continental Divide, conditions that typically cleared the trails of casual hikers. As he made his way down the trail, he passed a solitary figure climbing toward the lake. What struck Alex as unusual was the hiker's appearance and equipment. The man appeared to be in his 60s, with a full white beard and wearing what looked like outdated wool clothing, rather than modern synthetic materials. His backpack seemed old-fashioned, made of canvas rather than nylon, and his boots appeared to be leather rather than the lightweight hiking footwear common today. Alex exchanged a brief greeting with the hiker, who responded with a nod but did not speak. The man's face seemed strangely pale, and he moved with an unusual gait, almost floating rather than walking with the normal effort required at that altitude. Alex noted the man's park pass was hanging from his pack, though he couldn't make out the details from a distance. When Alex reached the trailhead approximately 30 minutes later, he mentioned the encounter to the visitor services staff. They confirmed that no one matching that description had entered the park that day, and no permits for backcountry camping had been issued to anyone of that age in the Bear Lake area. Alex thought little more of it, assuming the man might have been staying at one of the lodges outside the park entrance. 3 days later, On September 15th, Alex encountered the same figure while patrolling the trail to Dream Lake. This time, the weather was clear and sunny, with dozens of hikers on the trail. The white-bearded man appeared again, wearing the same wool clothing and carrying the same old-fashioned pack. He seemed not to notice the other hikers, who in turn paid him no attention. Alex approached the man to check his park pass, as was standard procedure for rangers. When he drew within 10 feet, the man stopped and turned to face him. Alex would later describe the encounter as deeply unsettling. The man's eyes seemed almost translucent, and his skin had an unnatural quality, like old parchment. When Alex asked to see his park pass, the man simply smiled and continued walking, disappearing around a bend in the trail, despite there being no side paths in that section. Alex reported the encounter to his supervisor, Ranger Jennifer Walsh, who suggested he might be mistaken about the man's appearance. Jennifer had worked in the park for over 20 years and had never encountered anyone matching this description. She agreed to accompany Alex on his patrol the following day to see if they might spot the unusual hiker. On September 16th, Alex and Jennifer patrolled the Bear Lake corridor together. They encountered the white-bearded man 3 times during their patrol, first near Nymph Lake, then again on the trail to Lake Hayaha, and finally near the trailhead at Bear Lake. Each time, the man appeared to be moving in a direction that made no geographical sense, sometimes appearing ahead of them on the trail, despite having just been seen walking in the opposite direction. The most disturbing encounter occurred when Jennifer attempted to speak with the man near Bear Lake. As she approached, the man turned and looked directly at her, then simply vanished between 2 large boulders where there was no place to hide. Both rangers searched the area thoroughly, but found no trace of the man or any path he might have taken. Following these encounters, Alex began researching the history of the Bear Lake area. He discovered that in 1947, a hiker named Arthur Whitman had disappeared while hiking alone in the area. Whitman was 63 years old at the time of his disappearance, with a distinctive white beard. He was an experienced outdoorsman who frequently hiked in the mountains wearing traditional wool clothing and carrying a canvas pack exactly like the figure Alex had encountered. What Alex found most chilling was a photograph of Arthur Whitman. In the park archives, it bore an uncanny resemblance to the man he had seen on the trail. The photograph showed Whitman standing near Bear Lake, wearing the same distinctive clothing and carrying the same type of pack as the phantom hiker. Over the following weeks, several other park employees reported encounters with the white-bearded man. A visitor services employee saw him standing near the entrance station, apparently looking at a map before disappearing when she approached to offer assistance. 2 maintenance workers reported seeing him walking along the road near Sprague Lake in the early morning hours, despite there being no footprints in the dew on the grass. The most dramatic encounter occurred on October 3rd, when a family visiting the park photographed what appears to be the white-bearded figure standing on a distant ridge above Dream Lake. When they examined the photograph later, they noticed something odd. The figure appeared semi-transparent, as if partially fading into the background scenery. The encounters with the phantom hiker decreased as the season progressed, with the last reported sighting in late October. Alex Thompson completed his seasonal assignment and returned to college, though he maintained an interest in the phenomenon he had witnessed. In 2018, he returned to work at Rocky Mountain National Park and has never again encountered the white-bearded man. The phantom hiker of Bear Lake remains one of the most persistent and well-documented ghost stories in the National Park Service. Multiple employees and visitors have reported encounters with a figure matching Arthur Whitman's description, often in areas where Whitman was known to hike before his disappearance. Whether these encounters represent an actual paranormal phenomenon, collective suggestion, or something else entirely remains open to interpretation. What is certain is that for a brief period in the fall of 2016, something walked the trails of Rocky Mountain National Park. Something that resembled a man who had vanished nearly 70 years earlier, leaving behind only questions and the memory of a white-bearded figure walking silently through the mountain mist. It was early March of 2011 when Ranger James Foster first documented the unusual lights appearing over the Mummy Range in Rocky Mountain National Park. At 41, James had been working as a night patrol ranger for 3 years, responsible for monitoring the park's more remote areas after dark, when most visitors had departed. The first incident occurred on March 3rd. While James was conducting a routine patrol of the Trail Ridge Road area, which was closed for the winter season. At approximately 9:47 p.m., he noticed a series of lights moving in formation above the distant peaks of the Mummy Range. The lights appeared to be spherical and emitted a pale blue glow, unlike any aircraft lighting he had ever seen. James stopped his vehicle and observed the phenomenon for approximately 12 minutes. The lights moved in precise geometric patterns, forming triangles, squares, and more complex shapes before dispersing and reassembling. There was no sound associated with the lights, and they moved with a smoothness that seemed to defy conventional aerodynamics. Using his ranger binoculars, James could see that the lights were not attached to any visible craft or structure. They appeared to be self-contained luminous objects that moved independently but in coordination with each other. He estimated their altitude to be approximately 2,000–3,000 feet above the mountain peaks, well below the minimum altitude for authorized aircraft in the area. James radioed dispatch to report the sighting, but the response came back with significant interference, unusual for that location. When he attempted to photograph the lights with his service camera, the images showed only darkness, as if something was blocking the light from reaching the camera sensor despite being clearly visible to his eyes. The following night, James was on patrol in the same area when the lights appeared again, this time closer to his position. He observed them for nearly 20 minutes, noting their precise movements and unusual characteristics. On this occasion, he attempted to track them using the Ranger vehicle's speed radar system, which registered movement but gave inconsistent readings, suggesting the lights were moving at speeds that varied dramatically from stationary to several hundred miles per hour in an instant. James documented both sightings in his patrol log and filed an official incident report with park headquarters. His supervisor, District Ranger Maria Rodriguez, reviewed the report and forwarded it to the regional office, where it was classified as unexplained aerial phenomena, and filed with similar reports from other national parks. The lights appeared again on March 7th, this time witnessed by 2 additional rangers, Michael Chen and Sarah Williams, who were conducting wildlife monitoring work in the area. All 3 observed the lights for approximately 15 minutes, noting similar characteristics to James's previous sightings. On this occasion, the lights appeared to interact with the environment below, causing the snow on certain slopes to glow with a faint blue light that persisted for several minutes after the lights had departed. Perhaps the most compelling evidence came on March 12th, when a group of astronomers from the University of Colorado were conducting observations at a research station near the park boundary. They witnessed the lights and were able to capture them on specialized equipment designed for astrophotography. Their images showed the lights in detail, revealing a complex internal structure that appeared to change as the lights moved. The astronomers' analysis of the lights revealed several unusual characteristics. They appeared to emit light in wavelengths outside the visible spectrum. They moved with instantaneous acceleration that should have been impossible for physical objects. And they seemed to respond to environmental factors such as wind and atmospheric pressure in ways that suggested intelligence rather than random movement. Following the astronomers' report, the Federal Aviation Administration conducted an investigation of the sightings. They confirmed that no authorized aircraft were operating in the area during the times of the sightings, and radar installations showed no corresponding contacts. The official FAA report concluded that the phenomena remained unidentified, but posed no threat to aviation safety. The lights continued to appear intermittently throughout March 2011, with sightings logged on March 15th, 19th, 22nd, and 28th. Each sighting followed similar patterns, with the lights appearing in the evening hours and performing complex maneuvers before disappearing. No satisfactory explanation was ever offered for the phenomena, though theories ranged from experimental military aircraft to extraterrestrial visitation. What makes the Mummy Range lights particularly compelling is the credibility of the witnesses and the quality of the documentation. Multiple trained observers, including park rangers, astronomers, and scientists, witnessed the phenomena over an extended period. Photographic and video evidence, while limited, supports the eyewitness accounts. James Foster continued working as a night patrol ranger until his retirement in 2018. In an interview for the park's Oral History Project, he reflected on his experiences. "I've spent thousands of nights in those mountains, and I've seen every natural phenomenon you can imagine: aurora borealis, ball lightning, atmospheric reflections. But those lights were something else entirely. They moved with purpose, with intelligence." The Mummy Range lights have never been satisfactorily explained. Similar phenomena have been reported in other wilderness areas across the United States, suggesting this is not an isolated incident. What the lights represent remains a mystery: experimental technology, natural phenomena not yet understood, or something else entirely. What is certain is that for a brief period in the spring of 2011, something unusual appeared in the skies above Rocky Mountain National Park. The rangers who witnessed these phenomena were trained observers familiar with the night sky and all that normally occurs there. What they saw defied explanation, leaving behind only questions and the memory of silent blue lights dancing in the mountain darkness. It was late July of 2014 when archaeology intern Maya Patel first discovered the unusual stone structures while conducting a survey in the remote Lumpy Ridge area of Rocky Mountain National Park. At 23, Maya was a graduate student in archaeology participating in a summer internship program with the National Park Service. Her assignment involved documenting previously unrecorded archaeological sites in the park's backcountry. The first structure was discovered on July 22nd, while Maya was surveying a remote area near Twin Owls, a distinctive rock formation accessible only by a strenuous hike from the nearest trailhead. As she documented a previously recorded Native American site, she noticed what appeared to be a carefully constructed stone cairn approximately 200 yards from the main site. What distinguished this cairn from typical trail markers was its construction and composition. It stood approximately 4 feet high and was built with precision that suggested advanced knowledge of engineering principles. The stones were fitted together without mortar in a way that created remarkable stability, despite the structure's height and slenderness. Most unusual were the specific types of stones used, several varieties that were not native to the immediate area, some of which would have required transport from several miles away. Maya photographed and documented the structure, noting its unusual characteristics in her field notes. She initially suspected it might be an undocumented historic or prehistoric feature, though its construction differed from known Native American or early European settlement patterns in the region. 2 days later, while surveying an area approximately 3 miles from the first discovery, Maya found a second structure, this one more complex than the first. It consisted of a circular arrangement of standing stones approximately 15 feet in diameter, with a central pillar stone carved with what appeared to be geometric patterns and symbols. The carvings were weathered but distinct, showing a level of craftsmanship that seemed unusual for the region. What disturbed Maya most was discovering that the central pillar stone was composed of granite that did not match any known formations in the immediate area. Analysis of the stone's mineral composition suggested it had originated from a location at least 20 miles away, raising questions about how it had been transported to this remote location without leaving evidence of quarrying or dragging. Maya reported her discoveries to her supervisor, park archaeologist Dr. Robert Harrison, who accompanied her to the sites on July 26th. Dr. Harrison had worked in Rocky Mountain National Park for over 15 years and was familiar with all previously recorded archaeological and historical sites in the area. He confirmed that the structures did not match any known cultural tradition in the region. The most perplexing aspect of the structures was their apparent age. Weathering patterns suggested they had been exposed to the elements for at least several decades, possibly much longer. Yet there were no records or oral traditions of their construction among local Native American tribes or early European settlers in the area. On July 29th, Maya and Dr. Harrison discovered a third structure while conducting a systematic survey of the area between the first two discoveries. This one was the most elaborate, yet a series of stone platforms arranged in terraces along a hillside, with what appeared to be alignment features that corresponded to specific celestial events. The platforms showed evidence of fire markings in specific locations, suggesting they may have been used for ceremonial purposes. What made this discovery particularly intriguing was finding a small stone tablet at the highest platform, inscribed with a series of symbols that did not match any known writing system. The tablet was composed of a dark, dense stone that Dr. Harrison identified as possibly basalt, though not from any known local formations. The archaeological team expanded their survey area, eventually discovering a total of 7 structures spread across approximately 5 square miles of rugged terrain. All shared similar construction characteristics and appeared to be part of a single complex or system, though their purpose remained unclear. The investigation took an unusual turn on August 5th, when the team discovered that several of the structures appeared to have been modified or added to recently. New stones had been incorporated into existing arrangements, and fresh tool marks were visible on some surfaces. Yet there were no footprints, vehicle tracks, or other evidence of human activity in the area. Dr. Harrison reported these developments to park headquarters, which prompted a more extensive investigation involving park rangers, law enforcement personnel, and additional archaeological specialists. The area was monitored for several weeks, but no evidence of who might be maintaining or modifying the structures was ever discovered. The most disturbing discovery came on August 17th, when Maya found a newly constructed structure near the original survey area. This one appeared to have been built within the previous 24-48 hours, consisting of a spiral arrangement of stones approximately 20 feet in diameter. At its center was a stone similar to the tablet discovered earlier, this time with additional symbols that appeared to be a continuation of the same writing system. What troubled Maya most was finding footprints near this new structure, not human footprints, but impressions that suggested a bipedal creature approximately 7 feet tall, with a foot structure different from humans. The prints were clear in the soft soil near the structure, but disappeared on the surrounding rocky terrain. The archaeological team documented all discoveries with photographs, measurements, and detailed notes. Samples were collected for analysis, including pollen samples from beneath the structures, which could help establish their age through radiocarbon dating. The results suggested that while some elements of the structures were indeed decades or even centuries old, others were relatively recent, with some modifications occurring within the past few years. The investigation concluded in September 2014, with the area designated as a protected archaeological site. Access was restricted to authorized personnel only, and additional monitoring equipment was installed to document any further changes to the structures. Maya Patel completed her internship and returned to graduate school, though she continued to analyze the data collected during the investigation. In a paper published in the Journal of Anomalous Archaeology in 2017, she documented the structures and their unusual characteristics without drawing definitive conclusions about their origin or purpose. The stone structures of Lumpy Ridge remain one of the most puzzling archaeological mysteries in the National Park Service. Their construction suggests advanced knowledge of engineering and astronomy, yet they don't correspond to any known cultural tradition. Their apparent maintenance and modification by unknown entities raises questions about who or what might be responsible. Perhaps most troubling is the evidence suggesting that whoever or whatever created these structures continues to maintain them to this day, adding new elements and modifying existing arrangements without leaving behind conventional evidence of their presence. The Lumpy Ridge structures represent a mystery that challenges our understanding of the past and suggests that some wilderness areas may hold secrets far older and more complex than we can imagine. It was early June of 2008 when veteran ranger Benjamin "Ben" Carter first noticed the anomaly in the remote backcountry of Rocky Mountain National Park. At 46, Ben had been working with the National Park Service for 22 years. The last 15 in Rocky Mountain. He knew the park's trail system better than anyone, having personally hiked every marked trail and most of the unofficial routes as well. The incident occurred while Ben was conducting a seasonal assessment of trail conditions and submissions in the remote northwest section of the park, an area known as the Shadow Cliffs region. This area contained only one marked trail, a 6-mile route to a remote alpine lake that saw fewer than 50 visitors per year due to its difficult access. Ben had set out on June 5th to check the trail after reports of unusual conditions from a backcountry ranger who had visited the area a week earlier. The first 2 miles of trail appeared normal, though Ben noticed that the usual signs of animal activity were absent: no tracks, no scat, none of the evidence of wildlife that typically characterized this area. As he approached the 3-mile mark, Ben noticed something that made him stop. The trail ahead appeared different. The vegetation seemed denser, the trees closer together, the ground more covered with undergrowth than he remembered from his previous visits just months earlier. The trail markers were missing, and the path itself seemed less distinct, as if it hadn't been traveled recently. Ben consulted his GPS unit, which confirmed he was on the correct route. He continued forward, noting that the forest seemed unusually quiet. Even the normal sounds of birds and insects were absent. The air felt heavy and still, with no breeze despite the open nature of the terrain he was traversing. At approximately the 4-mile mark, Ben encountered something that deeply troubled him. The trail simply ended, not gradually fading as unmaintained trails sometimes do, but terminating abruptly at a wall of dense vegetation that showed no sign of passage. He checked his GPS again, which indicated he should be in the middle of the trail, with approximately 2 miles remaining to reach the lake. Ben spent nearly an hour searching for any continuation of the trail, finding nothing but dense forest that showed no evidence of human passage. The vegetation was so thick that passage would require significant effort, with no indication that anyone had attempted it recently. Most unusual was the condition of the forest floor. It was covered with a thick layer of undisturbed moss and leaf litter, suggesting no one had walked there in years. Reluctantly, Ben turned back, documenting the unusual conditions in his field notebook and taking photographs of the area where the trail disappeared. As he made his way back, he noticed that the forest seemed to be changing. Areas that had been open on his way in now appeared more dense, as if the vegetation was actively growing and changing before his eyes. When Ben returned to the trailhead, he checked the trail register, which showed that 2 hikers had attempted the route 3 days earlier, but had turned back after approximately 3 miles, citing unusual trail conditions in their entry. This was consistent with what Ben had observed. though it didn't explain the dramatic changes he had witnessed. The following day, Ben returned with 2 other rangers to investigate further. 5-mile mark. The forest appeared denser than before, with vegetation that seemed to have grown significantly in just 24 hours. The rangers documented these changes with photographs and GPS coordinates, noting that the transformation seemed to defy normal growth patterns for the native vegetation. They also took soil samples, which later analysis showed to have unusual microbial activity and mineral compositions not typical of the area. Over the following week, Ben led several expeditions to the Shadow Cliffs Trail, each time finding that the trail had receded further, with the forest becoming increasingly dense and impenetrable. By June 12th, less than a mile of trail remained accessible from the trailhead, with the rest having been consumed by what appeared to be unusually rapid forest growth. What most disturbed the rangers was the absence of any normal forest activity in the affected area. No wildlife, no insects, none of the usual sounds and signs of a healthy forest ecosystem. The vegetation itself appeared unusual, with some plants showing growth patterns and characteristics that didn't match known species in the region. A team of biologists and ecologists was dispatched to study the phenomenon, but their investigation was limited by the inaccessibility of the affected area. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a forest ecologist from the University of Colorado who participated in the study, later wrote, "The vegetation changes we observed in the Shadow Cliffs area defy normal biological processes. Growth rates exceeded anything documented in temperate forest ecosystems, and the species composition appeared to shift within days rather than decades or centuries." The most disturbing development occurred on June 20th, when satellite imagery revealed that the entire Shadow Cliffs basin appeared to have changed, with forest density increasing dramatically and the alpine lake at the end of the trail seemingly disappearing beneath new vegetation. Yet when ground teams attempted to verify these changes, they found the area completely inaccessible, with vegetation so dense that passage was impossible without significant clearing operations. The Shadow Cliffs phenomenon was documented in a series of reports filed with the National Park Service, but no official explanation was ever offered. The trail remained closed, and eventually, all references to it were removed from park maps and literature, as if the trail had never existed. Ben Carter continued working for the National Park Service until his retirement in 2016. In an interview before his retirement, he reflected on the Shadow Cliffs incident. "I've spent my life working in wilderness areas, and I understand how forests grow and change. But what happened in that valley wasn't natural. It was as if the forest was alive in a way we don't understand, actively reclaiming the land and erasing evidence of human presence." The Shadow Cliffs Trail remains closed to this day, and the area where it once existed has become one of the most restricted zones in Rocky Mountain National Park. Occasionally, rangers patrolling the perimeter report unusual phenomena: strange lights in the sky above the valley, unexplained sounds, and the feeling of being watched by something unseen. What happened to the Shadow Cliffs Trail remains one of the most puzzling mysteries in the history of the National Park Service. Whether it represents an unknown natural phenomenon, some form of environmental response to human activity, or something else entirely, remains open to speculation. What is certain is that for a brief period in the summer of 2008, something extraordinary occurred in the remote wilderness of Rocky Mountain National Park, something that challenged our understanding of forest ecosystems and suggested that nature might possess capabilities beyond our current scientific knowledge. It was late October of 2019 when park communications specialist Jessica Ramirez first heard the voice that would haunt her for months to come. At 32, Jessica had been working for the National Park Service for 5 years, stationed at the Communications Center in Rocky Mountain National Park. Her job involved monitoring radio traffic from rangers in the field, coordinating emergency responses, and maintaining the park's communication systems. The first incident occurred on October 28th. During what should have been a routine night shift, the park was operating on reduced fall staffing, with only 3 rangers on patrol in the vast wilderness areas. The night was clear and cold, with an early season snow dusting the higher elevations. At approximately 2:17 a.m., Jessica picked up a transmission on the emergency channel used by park rangers. The signal was weak but clear, a voice speaking in calm, measured tones that didn't match any authorized ranger on duty that night. "There's something moving in the trees below the ridge," the voice said. "It's larger than a bear. The way it moves." Jessica checked her console to identify which ranger was transmitting, but the signal appeared to be coming from an unauthorized unit or from a location that wasn't registering on the system. She attempted to respond, but there was only static in return. The transmission continued for approximately 3 minutes, with the voice describing what appeared to be an encounter with an unknown creature. The speaker remained calm throughout, though Jessica detected an undercurrent of tension in the carefully measured words. "It's watching me now," the voice said, "standing at the edge of the trees. Just watching. The eyes reflect the light like a cat's, but they're too high off the ground." Jessica radioed the 3 rangers on patrol to check their status. All 3 responded immediately from their assigned patrol areas, confirming they were not the source of the mysterious transmission. This meant someone was using park service frequencies without authorization, or something else entirely was occurring. The mysterious voice continued its narration for another minute, before ending abruptly with the words, "It's coming toward me now. I have to..." The transmission cut off there, replaced by static that gradually faded to silence. Jessica documented the incident in the communications log and notified her supervisor, Communications Director Mark Thompson, who was conducting a routine check of the communications equipment. Mark reviewed the recording of the transmission and confirmed that it didn't match any known ranger's voice print. The signal characteristics were unusual as well. The transmission appeared to be coming from a location in the remote northwest section of the park, an area where no rangers were currently assigned. The following night, October 29th, Jessica heard the voice again at approximately 1:43 a.m. This time, the transmission was clearer, though the content was even more disturbing. "I found tracks this morning," the voice said calmly, "in the snow near where I saw it last night. 4 toes like a bear, but the shape is wrong, too narrow. And the stride..." Jessica again attempted to identify the source of the transmission, but the signal seemed to be moving, sometimes appearing to come from multiple directions at once. When she attempted to triangulate the position, the results were inconsistent, suggesting either equipment malfunction or something that defied normal radio transmission patterns. "I've been a ranger for 15 years, the voice continued. "I know these mountains. I know every animal that lives here. But whatever made those tracks, it's not in any guidebook." The transmission continued for approximately 5 minutes before ending as abruptly as it had begun, with the voice simply saying, "It's getting closer. I can hear it moving through the trees now." Jessica contacted the ranger on duty in the general area where the signal appeared to be originating. Ranger David Chen reported no unusual sightings or sounds, though he agreed to patrol the area more thoroughly. David found no evidence of unusual tracks or any other signs that might explain the mysterious transmissions. The voice returned on October 31st, this time at approximately 3:22 a.m. The transmission was weaker than before, with significant background noise that sounded like wind rustling through trees. I've been following it for 2 days now, the voice said, sounding strained for the first time. Or maybe it's been leading me. I'm deeper into the backcountry than I've ever been. The terrain here. Jessica noted that the signal characteristics suggested the transmitter was at a higher elevation than previous transmissions, possibly in the remote Mummy Range area where few rangers ever ventured. It knows I'm here, the voice continued. I can feel it watching me, even when I can't see it. Last night, something passed my camp, something large that moved without making a sound. The transmission continued for several more minutes, with the voice describing what sounded like a prolonged pursuit through the wilderness. Jessica found herself listening intently, despite knowing this was likely some form of unauthorized transmission or elaborate hoax. I'm running low on supplies now, the voice said. My radio is failing. I don't think I'll make it back to the trailhead. If anyone hears this, tell my wife I love her. Tell her. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by static. Jessica waited, hoping for more. But there was only silence. She documented the incident and notified her supervisor, who by now was taking these transmissions seriously enough to consider a search operation. The most disturbing aspect of these transmissions was their authenticity. The voice used terminology and references that only an experienced park ranger would know. The descriptions of terrain, wildlife, and park procedures were all accurate. Yet no ranger was missing, and no unauthorized personnel had been reported in the area. The voice never transmitted again after October 31st, despite Jessica monitoring the frequencies carefully for the remainder of her shift. A search of the area where the final transmission appeared to originate revealed no evidence of recent human activity, no footprints, no campsite, no sign of anyone having been there recently. Jessica continued working at the communications center for another year before transferring to a different park. In a statement given to Park Service investigators, she said, "I've worked with radio communications for most of my career, and I know hoaxes, equipment malfunctions, and unauthorized transmissions. This was different. The voice was real. The fear, the exhaustion, the professionalism, even in a crisis. Someone was out there in those mountains, facing something they couldn't explain." The mysterious voice on the radio was officially logged as unidentified transmissions of unknown origin and was never fully explained. No ranger was ever reported missing during that time period, and no evidence was found to suggest anyone had been in the remote areas described in the transmissions. Similar mysterious transmissions have been reported by other Park Service employees over the years, though none as detailed or persistent as those from October 2019. The Communications Center at Rocky Mountain National Park continues to monitor all frequencies, but whatever voice transmitted those messages in the fall of 2019 has never returned, at least not on frequencies we can detect. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, especially in the wilderness areas protected by our national park system. The Rocky Mountains, with their towering peaks and remote valleys, continue to hold secrets that defy explanation, despite our best efforts to understand and document them. The stories we've explored tonight represent only a fraction of the unusual encounters reported by Park Service employees over the decades. From unexplained footprints to mysterious lights, from stone structures of unknown origin to voices on the radio, these accounts suggest that something beyond our current understanding exists in the wilderness areas we've set aside to protect. What makes these encounters particularly compelling is the credibility of the witnesses, trained observers familiar with the natural environment and all that normally occurs within it. Park rangers, archaeologists, communication specialists, these are professionals trained to observe, document, and explain natural phenomena. Yet each of the cases we've examined tonight left even these experienced experts without satisfactory explanations. The Rocky Mountains span thousands of miles across multiple states, encompassing diverse ecosystems and terrain types. Within this vast wilderness, there remain areas rarely visited by humans, places where the natural world exists largely unchanged by human activity. It is in these remote areas that most of the unusual encounters occur, suggesting that whatever lies beyond our understanding prefers the solitude of the wilderness. Perhaps most intriguing is the consistency of certain elements across different accounts. The mysterious footprints with 4 toes, the stone structures of unknown origin, the lights that move with impossible precision. These elements appear in multiple reports from different locations and time periods, suggesting they may be part of a larger phenomenon that we have yet to comprehend. The National Park Service continues to document unusual encounters in official reports, though most are classified as unexplained phenomena and filed away without further investigation. Budget constraints, practical limitations, and the pressure to focus on more immediate concerns often mean that these mysteries remain unexplored, left to accumulate in dusty archives and forgotten files. Yet the encounters continue to this day, with Park Service employees occasionally reporting experiences that defy conventional explanation. Most choose not to share these stories publicly, concerned about professional credibility or the possibility of being assigned to less desirable positions. But in quiet conversations, around campfires, or in break rooms, the stories are passed from one generation of park employees to the next. What these stories represent remains open to interpretation. Unexplained natural phenomena, experimental technology being tested in remote areas, encounters with species not yet recognized by science, or something else entirely, something that exists beyond the boundaries of our current understanding. The wilderness areas protected by our national parks serve as reservoirs of biodiversity, natural beauty, and ecological balance. They may also serve as reservoirs of mystery places where the unknown can still exist, far from the developed world's lights and noise. In these vast spaces, there remain corners that have rarely seen human footprints, valleys that have never been fully explored, peaks that have never been climbed. Perhaps this is as it should be. The presence of mystery in our world reminds us of how much we have yet to learn, how much remains beyond our understanding. The Rocky Mountains have stood for millions of years before human arrival and will likely stand for millions more after we are gone. Whatever secrets they hold may remain forever beyond our comprehension. The park rangers who patrol these wilderness areas serve as guardians of these secrets as much as they serve as protectors of the natural environment. They walk the boundary between the known and unknown, between the documented and the mysterious. Occasionally, they glimpse what lies beyond that boundary, experiences that change their understanding of the world and leave them with questions that may never be answered. If you or someone you know has a true story to share about unusual encounters in our national parks or wilderness areas, leave it in the comments below. These stories deserve to be documented and remembered, even if they defy explanation. Thank you for watching Snowbound Screams. Until next time, stay safe out there.